Beat Podcast wird euch präsentiert von Tascam und Focusrite.
In 2001, Norwegian duo Röyksopp released their first single, Apple. At first a rather modest piece, it quickly made it clear that this is in a way a continuation of the 90s idea that very quiet music can be very intense. It's one of those rare tracks that even people who would otherwise only listen to rock music or jazz can love electronic music if done right. I recently listened to it again and noticed that it was actually built on a sample, something I didn't know for a very long time. And I was amazed by how creative their use of that sample is and the way they put it all together and kept it interesting for the full running length. It's really remarkable. On the follow-up album, Röyksopp came up with what is still to date their biggest hit, What Else Is There? It's a piece you'll find regularly on channels like MTV, and it sounds just as fresh as it did the first time around. Since then, they continued to release albums for a while, celebrating a lot of success. And then suddenly, they were gone just as quickly as they'd come, vowing never to return as an album act. So it was with quite some surprise when I heard that in 2022, the duo would return with not just one, but actually 3 different releases. So, as they're keen to point out in this interview, they did not actually break their vow, because Profound Mysteries is definitely an expansion, not just a repetition of the traditional album format. In a way, it celebrates that format by going far beyond the limits of what that usually entails. Each of these 3 parts can be listened to as a self-contained unit, but they also relate to each other, plus to the past and their influences, while still sounding entirely up-to-date and fresh. This interview was conducted in the Flachsbau in Berlin, near the River Spree. So that explains why you'll hear some noises in the background. These are actually ships passing by as we were talking about topics like melancholia, death, nostalgia, but also production, of course. Enjoy. So as I said, I would like to start with the topic of nostalgia, because it seems like it was at least a theme in a way for the new recordings. Nostalgia in a way, of course, means not being able to let go and not being able to accept the end. But you actually did. You decided that at some point there was not going to be another Röyksopp album. So I'm just curious how you look back on that decision from today.
Well, I think one has to add the fact that something has got lost in translation here, because we said at some point with regards to The Inevitable End that The Inevitable End, the album, would be our last traditional album. So when returning with Profound Mysteries, we feel that we kind of stuck to that promise, because we feel that Profound Mysteries is not a traditional album. However, I can clearly say that it's easy to arrest us on that matter, and I guess it was too...
I mean, the funny answer is we lied.
Yeah.
Or at least a little bit funny.
Yeah, not that funny,
no,
but it's
somewhat.
Somewhat funny, yeah. The funnier answer would be that we lied, yes. But it's tricky to let go, and we felt that we had more things we wanted to say within the album format. And it's always been on the Röyksopp bucket list to have at least a double album. So combining those 2 factors, i.e. the promise of not doing a traditional album anymore, and also a desire to make at least a double album, we thought, okay, let's go triple and see what happens.
I just spoke to Carl Cox, who's also recorded his first album in 10 years, and he said that it just didn't, which was a little bit earlier than yours, that he felt like no one was listening to a traditional album. Was that what played into that decision?
It has to do, well, you mentioned Carl Cox, and he's obviously someone who's been around for some time, and without any comparison, I think it's fair to say that we have possibly grown up under the same conditions and with the traditional format of an album. When we were kids, you would buy a piece of vinyl or a tape and you would play it from A to Z. There was no streaming alternative, obviously. So if you invested your hard-earned money in an album, you would listen to it to death from A to Z. And I think that's just cemented into our very core, our DNA when it comes to music. So it's, at least for me, a bit tricky to let go of that.
And there's also an element that we really haven't communicated in any interviews, and to put it bluntly, it's the fact that we really don't care about whether it's gonna be a very practical, or if it would hit the currents of today, in terms of, we just don't care. We just do it. There is, however, a certain element of the new tech that really benefits us, because we feel that we can do both. We can have this as a triple album, and for those who are interested, they can get it on vinyl if they want to, and you could still listen to it as if it was an album. At the same time, throughout the year, we're releasing it track by track, so that it pops up in your feed if you're interested, and you can get it like you get your normal media nowadays. So we feel that we kind of were in a position to get both the traditional old school way and the new blunted attention span way.
I think just to go back to what you said about we don't care, it's also perhaps more a matter of being true to yourself and not subscribing to whatever goes on in the world. The only way we can make sure that we are pleased with the outcome, the end product, is to be true to ourselves. And this is what we wanted to do, regardless of how the world works. It sounds a bit, I guess, persisting, like, or fight the rules kind of thing, or go against the current. But at the same time, there's always going to be that little segment that possibly thinks like us and do appreciate the fact that there is a album and so on. So we don't really cater to anyone, really, in all honesty, to anyone else other than ourselves. But also at the same time, we know that there are possibly likely to be people that feel the same way as us, and Carl Cox, it would appear.
Yeah, interestingly enough, when we talked, you also mentioned that his favorite artist, like album artist, was Jean-Michel Jarre, which is very interesting. Which probably you wouldn't expect it, but it makes sense.
It makes sense, and I think it has to do with the musical upbringing of. Well, I cannot speak for Carl Cox, but I'm guessing now. But because we are similar kind of in age and so on, and the things that we grew up with as kids would have been Jean-Michel Jarre, Kraftwerk, Depeche Mode, and so on, like the pioneers of electronic music of the 70s and 80s. Of course, so it's always going to be there. That's the reason why we ended up with electronic music. That's the reason why we have a friendship and why we met as kids, because we, on either side, Torbjörn has had the same preferences as I had, and that's why we met and had a mutual interest.
Interestingly enough, when I saw it was a double album, which is now, I believe, extended to a triple album, my thought wasn't that you were actually making like a sort of a playlist album, but I thought it was sort of a strong statement in favor of the album. I mean, to me, it's very much a classic album in the sense that there were double albums in the past with like sprawling double like worlds you could actually really immerse yourself in. So it feels like, with the possibilities of today of releasing something like this, it seems like a strong statement in favor of the album as a still valid format. Oh,
it's a love story again, as you say, to the format again, a format that. I don't want to make this an age thing. I'm so afraid of that, because you can come across as like the old man. It's like everything was better when I was young.
Embrace it.
I should embrace it indeed. Which is really not my intention. So I'm just going to steer back to what Torbjörn said earlier on, that it's there for those who appreciate that, to consume the music as an old, like an album. Or you could cherry pick your whatever tracks and do that thing. But the reason why, obviously, we've made it this way, and we feel like it's a holistic listening experience with a narrative has clearly to do with our profound love. Hey, no pun intended. Our profound love for the album format as we know it.
But was there sort of a moment you can pinpoint to when you said, okay, we will make an album again?
A moment. We feel that this grows like flowers. It's hard to say when you realize that there's actually something coming up from the ground, because the roots have done their part before. So that's how it is with us. It's on a deep level. It's a constant living with music and creativity between us. So exactly when things take form, that has to do with organizing your work. Because we worked both unorganized and organized, and the unorganized part that goes on all the time. It can just be a exchange of two sentences between Svein and I, and we have something going. The gears are churning inside our heads, that type of thing, and has been a lot of that prior to us actually making a big white poster on the wall, drawing lines between song titles, and doing the architecture of this project, which is a big undertaking, I must admit. Triple album with 10 songs, and if I might say so myself, no fillers. So was there a date where it became clear to us? No, it's more like a growing plant, I'd say.
Yeah, it's. This is going to sound very pretentious, which is the way we like it. But it's yeah. But it's obviously music is not something that is exclusive in our head to that degree that you can just turn it off. It's always kind of on in our heads because it's such a big part of our life. So it's always running, I guess, in the subconscious. It's always there for whatever reason. It's so. As Torbjørn said, there's no and today, 5th of October, we're going to start making music. There's no such thing. It's always on. But sorry, yeah, Torbjørn.
No, it is to compare with if we did architectures, what we've done so far would be houses. But this time around, it's a multi-complex building, which obviously changes more during production than the building of a house. So the whole process has been much more intricate to weave together, and the arch of the storytelling or world building or whatever it is that we do in this project, Profound Mysteries, has been really important from day one. So tracks have moved from disc 1 to disc 2 and then back again, because a new track came in, and sort of the anatomy of this project is kind of richer than anything we've done in the past, and so it kind of it never stopped until just before the release of disc 1.
Yes, I actually, when I try to, in a way, define the albums in terms of a mood or approach or concept or songwriting structure, I actually thought it wasn't that easy. I think it's not easy to say. I think at one point you said maybe the yellow one is more dynamic, maybe the red one is a bit more introvert. It's really, in a way, it flows in and out of each other. It's intertwined, which I like.
We obviously, staying in the vein of self-centered, pompous sentiment, we should, at least we try to jump. We want it to be holistic, but not boring. Initially, we had a clear sort of narrative, and it was more streamlined, I'd say, in terms of its narrative and how it was sort of composed together, the different parts. But it just felt a bit dull. It wasn't challenging enough. Not saying that it's challenging in any way, but challenging as a listener. Just you want to mix it up, is what I'm saying. I find it boring to listen to an album composing of, let's say, just one genre, unless that's exactly what you're going for. It's
No, like it could be nice, but
it could be really nice, but it's
definitely not what
exactly
we
that's
are
that's
trying to do here. Yeah.
Exactly, that's the thing. That's not what we are about. It's really nice to have an evening with minimal techno for 8 hours. Really nice, and you can get really deep into that. But obviously, that's not what Profound Mysteries is all about. So we wanted to make those, however minute, contrasts and shifts in terms of sentiment and styles and so on, and also tie the 3 bits together, the 3 parts, so they don't feel detached to each other. Whether we've succeeded, I do not know, but at least that's what we tried to do. So I'm glad if you can find that there is some sort of pattern, although not clear, but certainly a kinship between the 3 parts.
Yes. I mean, in terms of the albums, there is sort of a looking over your shoulder, isn't there? I mean, it does refer to the past. And so I was wondering, where did this nostalgia came from, essentially?
Well, I think, again, being pompous, we think that the music that we make and everything we do is a representation of whatever given time and place we're in our lives. And again, sounding pretentious, but it's true. If there's something harrowing happening in your life, you will be colored by it. And ultimately, for us being musicians, that would color the music you make. If I lost my legs, I would possibly not make happy hardcore. I would possibly, I think, make something else. But that's just me.
Mm-hmm.
So
the word nostalgia is a little bit too weak, I feel, for what we are feeling or trying to convey. It's a little bit sort of too easy to pick. Sometimes we tell that we make music because we feel that language itself has its limitations. Spoken language, written language, and there's a need for those things that cannot be told in words. And I think these are the things that we are striving for, touching upon. And some of that is why, to me at least, the story about the makers of memories for replicants in Blade Runner, in the second installment, 2049, that there's actually a person making these memories, and to sort of reflect upon any given state of you is really defined by those memories. And that's something other than nostalgia. It's a little bit more existential, I feel. And just a realization that the past has made the present. And there's a loss in that as well. There's a loss and almost meaninglessness in the now, because you can't change the past, and it's there. It's almost like for every second of now, it's given to you, like a thing that could have been made by a memory maker if you were a replicant, which I'm pretty sure none of us are.
Well,
can't tell. Who would it be then?
Yeah. Then again, who does, or whatever he says, leaving the unicorn origami. But that's in the present song. Anyway, yeah.
Yeah, that was a lot of references to Blade Runner, but that's just to point at something which is deep within us. There is a longing or a trying to put into words without putting into wordsness in our music that is very. It has to do with loss. For sure.
If we are going semi-highbrow, I think it's, and again, keeping us pretentious, I think it has to do with almost like Ludwig Wittgenstein's lions, and the perception and so on. That, how should I say this? Well, when it comes to this, we are the lions. I guess we don't have the vocabulary to, although we. Well, let's back out of this because it becomes too tricky. There's a reason why we work with music and not with words, is what we're saying. It's easier for us to convey our sentiment and emotions via reverb and hi-hats as opposed to written words.
Yes. And maybe as a background, why I'm so interested in this interview, kind of forcing you into this pompousness, is because I've never considered myself a nostalgic person or like a backwards-looking person. But
we're only being pompous because we think it will make us rich.
Oh, fantastic!
Somehow.
Well, I hope it's working. Then.
Sorry.
No, it's. I just realized that for the past few years, maybe also after the birth of my daughter, which is another like turning point, and you start looking back, and I find that I'm drawn to the past almost, and I had a very like something moved me deeply when Klaus Schulze died, and obviously he wasn't like part of a generation with Edgar Froese dying first, which I had kind of expected because I'd seen him in an interview shortly before, and he looked very fragile and ill. And then, but Klaus Schulze, I had actually interviewed him myself in person. He was so nice and such a gentle person. And then Vangelis dying, and it really affected me. And I think it made me realize that we connect music to moments when we're alive. So when that person who creates that music dies, something in us realizes that we will too. And that's. I don't think it's pompous. I think it's it's like you can use the word existential, but in a way it's very, very primal and
possibly embedded in some sort of, I don't know, is it the limbic system? Those things sit, I think. But that was kind of what I was hinting at when saying, whatever we do as artists represents where we are in a given time in our lives. And I don't know your age, but clearly we are not 14 anymore, Torbjörn and I. So the perspective on life is different when you see, as you say, people you look up to, whether it being people in family or whether it being artists or whatever, getting older and potentially passing and so on. It does have an effect on you. You mortality becomes so much closer. When you're 8, you don't think that, or at least I didn't think too much about it. Your own mortality and other people and so on and so forth. So the nostalgia, if we can call it that, I can understand. And also there is that thing again coming across like an old man now without any bitterness, but there are less secrets to me now when it comes to music. I don't claim to have a profound knowledge, but certainly I can recognize things that I've seen in the past in modern music, which is a bit of a shame. I wish I could be more sort of amazed, like, I've never heard this before. And for whatever reason, I tend to find the little nuggets, the secrets, not necessarily in modern music, but rather in the past. And it's I don't know why that is. It might just be me and how my preferences. But I think that also has to do, is one of the reasons why we are, as you say, looking a bit towards the past and not necessarily making retro replicas of what has been done before, but certainly borrowing elements or making a nod to things of the past and genres and styles of the past. That was a long-winded answer, and now I shall pass the mic on to you, Torbjörn.
No, I for one, I'd like to hear what you had to say, Svein. And I was just thinking while Svein was talking about something which is really a trip when it comes to other people's nostalgia, because you can have a nostalgia for a time where you haven't been alive. That's evident in young people. A few years ago, there was a peak in synthwave. And to look at that, because we're both into it. I mean, what's not to like? What's not to like? I mean, it's all obviously mostly made so-called in the box with plugins and VSTs. So it's because it's young people, they cannot afford original equipment, which has become ridiculously expensive, like an old Juno or something like that. No. So it's all in VSTs plugins, and they have some sort of nostalgia for a time where they haven't been alive, but we were alive. And that's just so weird, because I share the nostalgia that synthwave artists have, and I like the aesthetic, I understand it, but in difference to them, I actually experienced in real time as well. That's a trip.
You're part of the nostalgic dream.
Yes.
It's crazy. It's funny to me.
I agree. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, I have nothing to add. I'm just nodding. Obviously, the microphone can't pick that up, my nodding, but here you go. This is me nodding.
I think it's interesting that there's a typical journalist question for instrumental artists. There's always, how do you communicate a message in your music? It's instrumental. But what I find interesting is probably my favorite track of the two albums is Unity. And it really moves me in a way that doesn't really fit the music. The music is very uplifting, I think, in a way, or most people would characterize it that way. But it sort of makes me feel beautifully sad in a way. And I guess that is part of that. It connects to something, like these themes are. I don't think there's a single lyric on these two albums, unless I'm mistaken, which obviously like clearly deals with loss. Maybe one exception, Sorry. But I think all of the other ones are. I mean, you could read the lyrics, and they don't seem to make it like this theme of loss obvious. It's not that concrete. It's really interesting to me.
Well, there's this thing that we didn't invent, but it's part of who we are as artists, and it's the duality of some sort of energetic call to action juxtaposed to some sort of sorrow. And that's a reflection on how Sven and I operate on an emotional level, I believe, because we tend to have feelings which are not monophonic. They are just polyphonic feelings, like bittersweet, like chords in our hearts rather than single tones. So that's why it's like that, and that's, we don't always make these kind of juxtapositions in our music, but some of our best tracks have that. I don't know why we don't do it all the time, but I guess to mix it up, I guess.
I guess it perhaps demands a bit. It's somewhat trickier, I think, at least, to convey a certain ambiguity or whatever you want, like multi-layered message or sentiment, as opposed to, make a hardcore track where the message is very clean cut and plays in synchronization. Yeah. So, as you say with Unity, I appreciate what you say, and I concur, I agree. And that's what we want to do. I think there is a certain touch of melancholy in quite a lot of our music. Melancholy is too bluesy, because it's not blues, but there's a touch of some sort of tristesse, as they say in the French, to what we do. Even the chirpy tunes has a bit of that, a slight little thing. So I understand what you're saying, and I don't know whether it's. I think there's an element of longing in our music. Again, a bit pompous, but I think there is. I think there's. We touch upon things like doubt and uncertainty, and to a certain extent, as you say, loss. Feelings that are somehow linked together in I don't know why that is, but it seems like a sentiment that we often return to: doubt, longing, and a touch of sadness, and
it's like the curse of the racing mind, the mind that never rests. Like on your best day, your exam day, you passed with excellent degrees, you're celebrating with hands in the air, and you suddenly remember that your aunt is really ill. That type of thing, that's always, it's never a hooray, it's like a hooray minus or something like that.
And I guess in a way it's also because the pop song as a format doesn't resolve. I think that's its strength. It sort of it gives you one moment, and then it doesn't resolve. It just it's that feeling. And then, but dance music, you dance through it. So it's sort of in itself, it's sort of a contradiction. If you go to a club and you dance all night, it's sort of at the end nothing happened, but sort of problems can suddenly no longer seem that big.
That is true. I agree.
It's true. It has to do with doing. Doing just is a solution to so many things, and that's probably why there's so many. My pet theory at this very second.
Spur of the moment theory, postulate, rather.
I believe that depression in young people is on the rise and has been for some time. At least I'd read that. There was some studies going on that, and that probably has to do with inactivity. Because, as you say, coming together like that, or something which is unrelated, being out in nature, doing things, it helps a lot with negative feelings. And you solve things through doing unrelated tasks, that's for sure.
Mm.
Yeah, no, it's quite evident to me at least, but I'm obviously not the example for humanity, but certainly it works for me. Just having that little walk, that doing, clears the mind, and I just feel happier after a walk. As simple as that.
Is your studio located in nature? Is it close?
I wish. I wish we.
Let's lie.
Yeah, our studio is nature because we actually make all the music outdoors.
In the marshlands.
Yeah. No, my favorite is to. We have a lake with several islands on them, and there are different equipment on each island, and we have to swim between the islands to record the different parts. And we have another bigger island with a helicopter pad, and that's where all the vocalists fly in. And to get to that island, we have to bribe people.
I think it would have been better. You should have done the like a zip line, but in a MC Escher kind of the water.
That always sort of slides downwards.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So you always go that way.
Yeah.
So that's what we have. I just realized
we have that.
We have that. Yes. We have challenged the laws of physics. Yes. But to be more truthful in our answer, we do both live kind of nature in a
somewhat a closeness,
to nature and open scenery. I think I don't even think I know because I chose it. I chose to live near I need to see the ocean, and I need to have trees and that's kind of stuff close to me in order to breathe, as they say. Yeah.
Let's talk about 3 of the tracks in like a bit more specific. Denim-clad baboons. Is that would you say like a reference to Apple?
It's clearly a reference to the birth of Röyksopp, and I think that even goes in the name. That's just me. But yeah, it's very. You've used the phrase "looking back," and certainly there is I said several times now, nods to the past, not only other artists but also our own past. What we have done there's nods to the Understanding, the album The Understanding, and nods to Melody AM, and clearly Denim-clad baboons, for those who are have the esoteric ear, such as yourself, clearly. Will note that the production of it is very much in vein of Melody AM in its crunchy, semi-distorted soundscapes. Sorry.
And it's also something about. I have to take care not to be too sort of music theory technical here, but something called quantization, which has been becoming surprisingly popular in music, which are not even electronic music, just pop music. It's all quantized. And if you go and make the so-called more wonky style beat, it's not nowadays in 22 it sounds just so in the past. So we need for someone else, which are younger, to spearhead something which is less quantized, so that it becomes fresh again. Because we like that too. We like very, very much why not both kind of people when it comes to this. We like the sort of offbeat, sort of when it's more organic and it's not so strict. But we also like the strict, tight, quantized beats. But I think that's one of the things that make denim-clad baboons sound so much past is the offbeatness of the melodies, and it's really not hitting. It's a little bit looser.
The deliberate sloppiness is something that we like. The intentional flaws.
But it's so strange to think that in 22 it just sounds deliberate sloppiness. Just sounds old.
Yeah.
When you produce it sounds like this is made in a different
exactly.
Era.
I
Yes,
guess.
spirit.
In 2022, you have an app to
exactly.
You press a button and then you have sloppiness.
Exactly. Well, that would have been nice. And I think because there are certain producers that are younger ones, if we can be that old, and I think we should, because we are. When they go for the wonkiness, the unquantized, they go too far.
They don't nail it.
They don't nail it. It's overboard. It's I think if you listen to, I guess, particularly hip hop of the 90s and sort of early 2000s, where they perfected how to, just shut or move beats around, just again not being too technical.
We're talking about microscopic movements here.
Exactly. Yeah, just with the MPCs, just nudge things. They nailed it. It must be said, and obviously, again, we have that little legacy with us, not to the same extent, perhaps, but. When young producers these days do it, they tend to just go too far. So it doesn't sit together.
It's just like an announcement for wonkiness itself, rather than being musical.
Exactly. It becomes a novelty, like a shtick. Like, look at us, how delayed is this snare? Like, ooh, too much, sir. Exactly.
I think what in Apple the sloppiness I think came from the fact that it was actually a sample, right?
Often, but not necessarily though. I think it was fun. How back in the day can go? Well, if you go to, let's say, a genre like breakbeats of the early 90s, I think that was the case. You had people who kind of didn't know what they were doing, who just pieced things together, and they'd sloppy cuts in their samples, and they didn't hit the transients and so on. So you had that sort of they sampled a bit of James Brown, who was obviously not quantized, and then they added a quantized 4 to the floor kick drum and so on. So it became that wonkiness undeliberately, but certainly with the best of the hip hop producers, for instance.
It's more deliberate.
I think Dr. Dre, certainly some of his stuff is quite deliberate, I think.
Yeah, but the use of samples or the lack of use of samples today is obviously a big loss in terms of artistic. If you view it if you skip the economic obvious side of it, why it's like that, and just that's something that I really wish was in there, because it prompts people to maybe even the sample wouldn't be perfectly in tune, but you kind of like it. But you wouldn't have done it deliberately. It's just something that comes to you like a little gift from creativity itself when you sample. And it's a pity, it's a shame that it's not more samples.
You couldn't have, let's stick to Dr. Dre. You couldn't have Blackstreet's No Diggity without a sample. And the kick drum, which is obviously saying, with like 10 different transients, and just flop, and also the snare, or the clap, or whatever you want to call it. It's a sample, and that couldn't have been made without that being a sample, and so on and so forth. There's no bass line to it. It's just the kick and the snare.
No, there's a whole industry of people making something that's supposed to sound like soul samples that you can buy in packs, which is something that people make and play with Rhodes VSTs, put on some vinyl crackle, maybe an organ in the background, and a choir sample in the background. But these all are just too perfect and in tune to serve that purpose that we're talking about. It
doesn't become an Al Green sample just because you have that thing.
Yeah, it's a little bit too deliberate. So to me, the way I perceive and feel it, it's just like when you drink diet something, and you have that sugary feeling, and then you realize it's not really there. So you get some sort of hole in your experience. That's what I get with these manufactured samples. It's getting us there, but it doesn't serve that same purpose. It doesn't fill. So please make it easier to someone. Make it easier to sample and not sue people. Just just sample more. It's great.
It's great, and also I think now that every true crime on Netflix has that same the color palette you describe, with the crackling and the sort of fluctuating bendiness or LFO.
Oh, yeah, that's old.
It's old. It's got to be 1986.
Yeah.
It's lost its purpose, I find.
So I think one of them, either the yellow or the red one, it does start with vinyl crackle, doesn't it?
But it's a true
Yeah,
vinyl
well,
crackle.
so it's true vinyl
of
crackle.
course, that's
Everything we do is real. That's the word of the streets.
it is actually vinyl crackle from some sampled drums.
Okay.
So it's directly from vinyl.
From the drums which we use on the track?
In the intro, yeah.
Yeah. Maybe just to close this off,
Could I
we
just
do-
add, by the way,
Yes.
on that specific, the drum, it's deliberate, like everything we do, that it's so poorly, which is kind of what you said, cut the hi-hats particularly.
Yeah.
It's done, and the sloppy programming on denim-clad baboons, clearly done with the uttermost intention,
Yes.
that it's like, it's struggling. Anyway.
yes, actually, because Apple actually doesn't sound sloppy in the same way. I think
No.
it doesn't sound sloppy at all. It actually sounds really.
Yeah.
I think it's incredible use of that sample. I didn't know it was a sample until very recently. I just always assumed, and I asked myself, how do you come up with that melody? Even if you know it's a sample, it's still, I think, very creative.
Yeah, no. It's not a sample like sampling
Exactly.
something and putting on
Yeah.
on a 4 to the floor kick, which is obviously also called sampling. But the art,
And also fine.
Yeah, the art of sampling. I don't think there is a limit to it. Sort of the micro sampling experts, which some people go completely crazy with sampling like hundreds of bits of music in one bar and all that stuff. So there's thank you for saying that, and we truly believe it is an art form, a lost art form.
And obviously it's a matter of context. If I took 8 bars of Michael Jackson and put a kick drum on it, it's a sampling, but it's not that great, because possibly the track I sampled, let's call it Beat It, was great initially, so I didn't do that much. But if I somehow managed to chop it around, shuffle it, do something with it that puts it into a different context, it's a different animal.
It should almost be 2 categories: sampling something that's already great. If you just looped it, it would be great. That's one thing, and sampling something which kind of doesn't really make sense and making it into something great. That's a different layer of sampling, a different category, I'd say.
Okay, the second one I had picked was Sorry, which is probably my second favorite track of the 2 albums. I think this one also starts with like a field recording. I think the different field recordings which lead into the tracks and lead out of the tracks. Without giving away everything, where were they taken from? Is it do you have an archive of stuff, or were they specific recordings from a specific place for a specific purpose, like for a specific track?
It differs. We do have a bit of a, without coming across as too much OGs or back in the day, but we have been, ever since we met as kids, a friend of ours, whom we also made music with when we were kids, he had a portable DAT player, like this Sony DATman thing, and we did field recordings, or we actually did recordings with the intention of sampling it, but it was that thing where you had to learn. Like, I think we started by throwing stones or rocks rather into water and smashing bottles and those kind of things, thoughting that we were geniuses. But it turned out that those kind of samples were rubbish and utterly useless. But then we discovered that the ambience recordings, i.e. field recordings, really worked nice. And at the same time, we had people like the ambient artist Biosphere, who's from Tromsø, who is pretty darn good at it. So that's been in our head ever since that time. So we have quite a vast library, and we still do field recordings and record our own little samples. But whether or not whether they are new or old, it's all a matter of whether they fit in the context, I find.
Yeah, when it comes to field recordings, we can we don't really care too much about the source. There's some places online you can find great field recordings, and on Profound Mysteries it's a good mix of our own and things that we've just found online.
Yeah, and I have to say, bought online.
Yes, that's true. We pay the
if we use it, we pay the people who do it. Yes, that is true. But yeah, I lost track. Where were we?
When I heard the opening bars of that piece, sorry, I had two associations. The first one was Night Porter by Japan, and the second one was Satie. I don't know, do you draw from influences from outside pop music and like that a lot?
Yeah, Eric Satie is an interesting thing. Apparently, that kind of music was really frowned upon by some people from the upper class when it came out, when their offspring went on to learn piano and came home and played Eric Satie. There was a big faux pas in many societies, like, this isn't really music, you should not be playing that. And to see the sort of I guess one of these, they're used in memes, it's everywhere, and for some reason, obviously when people say Eric Satie with the beginning of Sorry, it makes sense, but that song originally was for strings only, and it sounded completely different, but we found the piano was what worked with the voice the most. So it became all stripped down. I never realized how much it could resemble Eric Satie.
No, just to as you say, it started out with a more sort of, we established a chord with strings. But that string section is removed, so we stripped it further and further down to the core, and so that's kind of how it became that way. But back to what you asked, we I'd say quite evidently and clearly go beyond our own genre, whatever that might be, in terms of our influences. And we've always had a keen ear to whether it being classical composers such as Satie, or whether it's neoclassical, like, I don't know, Michael Nyman or Philip Glass or whatever. Arnalds from Iceland and so on. It's all there. We are, as said before, music is always there, and I can easily listen to 60s soul just as much as, I don't know, Arvo Pärt.
Yeah.
Just no limits. If it's good and if it gives you something, then you should go for it.
It's a really beautiful piano sound. Is it a real piano, or is it sample?
That's one of the things I think we can give away for free, because we've reached peak piano now. It's as a musical society, we've experienced peak piano, so it's on the decline. But this is a free VST from.
Is it Spitfire?
It's Spitfire, yeah. It's their felt piano, but obviously with a processing chain, which is on Ableton. If you have to scroll through it, it's like 5 meters long.
And it's also, as you know, if you make music or deal within VSTs, there are certain places on the piano roll where a sound sounds good, like certain frequencies, as it is. This is where it sort of plays, and as soon as you transpose it, just a note, it's, this is rubbish, it doesn't play at all. So I think we found the sweet spot. It's
nominated to best use of the free VST. No, it's not.
You should continue the lie. Go on. Please lie.
Go on. Yes.
Lie
Spitfire has awarded us with a diploma of best use of the free VST felt piano.
So it's not a multi-layered thing. It must be like as you said, there must be an enormous sort of space and reverb created for this piano to have this.
Yeah, it is. It's a long processing chain, as one says in industry. But yeah, no.
I guess it's that one thing where this is kind of what we like to do, and it is to shape sounds. It's just fun. It's that's why we do this. It's you get a kick drum and you go, I just have to do something with it, and you just I need to take this one out and that frequency up and compress it a bit more, make it a bit longer, make it shorter, and the transient needs to go up or down or whatever. We have to do some. There has to be some sort of involvement. I don't know if it's like OCD or whatever it is, but.
Fun fact about Sorry that we touched upon a little bit, the track Sorry. It's sorry, I meant to say the track called Sorry.
There you go.
Sorry about that.
The track?
Yeah. It is a deleted song, sort of hidden behind the song that we hinted to. It's a lot of strings and actual, recordings of a whole orchestra, which just it didn't help the vocals. There's only a viola and double bass left.
There's a double bass, yeah. And perhaps one. Yeah, no, viola. Yeah. Yes. I have to think in English. Yes, viola. That is true. Yes.
All that stuff existed at some point.
I guess it has to do again with, as I said, the compulsive behavior. We want to try option A and B and C, and what works, what justifies the track, what's the best end result. And Sorry is one of those examples where we have, I'd say, 3 different kind of versions, but we landed on the one you hear, where it's more. Pulled back, I guess, because.
But it becomes bigger sometimes when you take things away.
Exactly.
Because you think big string section that makes it big, but as we deleted track by track, the track just grew, and at the end, as you pointed out, it's only the sparse piano left. That sounds the biggest of it all.
Yeah, and it just gives it more, in my head, credibility to the lyrics and everything, and more space. And less sugary, I thought, and therefore also more gravitas and so on, and weight.
What I particularly love about this one is towards the end, when it starts going into this sort of repeated coda, there's like a really subtle chord shift, which I love. And how do you see this like relative importance of sound versus composition? As you said, maybe you have OCD in terms of sound. I think it pays off, but of course, as a creator, it sometimes can be almost hard to go through.
That's why we are 2 people, so that one can tell the other, all right, let's move the hell away from this tambourine.
Yeah.
Yes.
But it just seems to me that quite often in electronic music, the sound part is overemphasized at the cost of the composition. How do you see that yourself?
Well, I don't know. You mentioned chords. When we because it's easier to make more traditional music and have more chord changes throughout the song. But for some reason that I really cannot explain, we don't want that. When we do have a chord change, we want it to hit hard. We want it to hit profoundly. And that's why we search for the best sort of progression that we have, and it's very often looped throughout the whole song. And it's no problem for us to change up the chords to make some sort of more traditional variation in the music. Like music has been written for thousands of years. Can't have the same chords. It's just. Why? When it's so easy to change it up. But for some reason it kind of lessens the aesthetic message for us to throw in chord changes willy-nilly. But that particular change, it just says something. The one in Sorry. It's just once.
Yeah. And it's not that pronounced, but it does, as you say, it strikes you if you pay attention to it. So I think it has to do also with necessity. Like certain genres, it becomes show-offy. Look what I can do. I can go from this chord's progression to this one and that one, but it doesn't feel necessary. So, and in terms of what we want to convey, we often, as Torbjørn said, this is enough. These 2 chords or whatever 4, they say sufficiently. There's enough here to be said. So that's why I think correct me if I'm wrong, I think perhaps like an old dog is where we have, well, it's...
Yeah, that's for some reason that has like 158 chords, but it
in a matter of 30 seconds.
It feels like 2 chords.
It feels like 2 chords, but it's I guess it's like a what's it called, inversions and so on. But yeah,
but it also climbed chromatically downwards all the time.
But it's there it felt necessary, and I don't know how it's strange to sort of, we don't need to justify the artistic choices, but it's a feeling. It's as simple and cheesy as that. It's a feeling like, is this necessary to go there? No, it's fine with these chords. Let's do that.
Was there a version without it?
In Sorry?
In this particular piece?
No, I think that was the crux where where what you are trying to say is becoming crystallized.
And because we write the vocal melodies and lyrics and so on as well, we felt that, as Torbjörn said, if there was the crux, the would that be the contrapunkt? I don't know, but it's like the change. This is where we are going. We want to land. That's that point. So it felt like the right thing to do. Yeah.
Actually, we're running slowly out of time, so I'm going to skip the third one and go to our final. I like to ask one final question in each of the interviews, which is, these days there's a lot of talk about the overlaps between craftsmanship and music, and like areas which would usually be considered, I don't know, a public service only, can also be considered art. Do you think that something like making a really good cup of coffee can be compared or can be as expressive as making a piece of music?
From some perspective, even more so, because it's the coffee making is a social experience, whereas sitting alone making music, I guess for some artists we will find there's already artists that are drawing pictures that find that AI can replicate their works. Have you seen that? And that's probably coming to music at some point. And as we jokingly say, we are trying to make music that's the hardest for the AI to emulate, which I truly believe that we are somehow successful in.
Particularly with this project, which is fairly...
Particularly with this project, yeah. I think so. But we are not necessarily so comfortable with throwing around definitions of the word art. Sometimes we refer to what we do as, well, in our art we and don't give it a second thought, and sometimes it feels more apt to say, if you can call it art, as a caveat to what we're saying. So I'm totally comfortable with leaving that distinction up to others, but what's traditionally called artisan, the craftsmanship is increasingly valuable in a more digital age, and it fills a social function that art cannot fill, because art by itself is a little bit more lonely, the creator and then sort of the sharing, whereas
that's interesting. Yeah, that's true.
I think also on a very general sort of sense of the word, I think we like experts, people who have a very narrow field. That's a soft spot we have, and that can be, I have an expertise in hats or in knowing oranges and so on. We love that sentiment, that someone is has an expertise that you don't necessarily understand. And also, you then also go questioning whether it's just a hoax or a charade, or are they true experts and I cannot fathom what they're doing. So I think it's fair to say that we have a fondness for that, where you don't really know whether they are a poser or a genius within their field. And I like that. I like to that thing, that notion. And we obviously are posers in that regard.
End of interview.
Thanks a lot.